Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Doug Gulbrandsen, also known as Dr. Doug. So Dr. Doug is president of Marketing and Growth Strategist, a consulting company for small businesses, as well as co-founder of Platinum Alliance, a branding and marketing strategy company. He is an award-winning co-author of the best-selling book, Guerrilla Secrets. He is a Guerrilla Marketing Master Trainer. He also hosts a globally syndicated radio show and podcast on K4HD Radio, iHeartRadio, as well as major podcast apps. Dr. Doug and Friends Radio, Inspire Vision. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Doug.
Thanks, Kimberly. How are you doing?
I am doing awesome. So excited to have you on today.
Oh, it's good. I'm glad you got through that intro.
Yeah. All those hard words. So why don't you start out by telling everybody a little bit about you, how you started out, and kind of how you got to be doing what you are doing today.
Well, I grew up my major years in Chicago. Went to undergrad and then went to Northwestern University Dental School and became a dentist. Okay. And practiced, I actually practiced in Chicago for about 5 years, and then I got tired of the cold and moved to Palm Springs, which was just the opposite. And there I practiced for 21 years. And back in '96, I sold my practice and because of some physical issues that I had, and actually went back to business school. And I had hired some consultants for my practice, and I was just fascinated by their technology and the whole concept of what they were using, maybe particularly because it really got into human behavior also, which I had studied when I was in undergrad. And so anyway, long and short is I sold my practice and went back to business school. I've spent a number of years helping people, small business owners, and really focusing just on small business owners, helping them to improve their business and so on and so forth. Took a break and did some real estate as I moved around in different locations. And then I moved here to Utah back in 2010. And at that point in time, I've worked a little bit with small businesses. And at this point in time, I've decided that I want to focus more on how can I make a difference in other people's lives.
Nice. So Chicago to Palm Springs, you said, to Utah.
Well, Chicago, Palm Springs, Sacramento, Boise, Utah.
Okay, got it. Well, I also went to school in Chicago, the optometry school there.
Oh, cool.
And as soon as I graduated from school, same reason, I ran right down to Georgia. So I've been here ever since.
Amen.
I was thinking about moving a little further south even. So, so you changed many times throughout your life. So what made you go into dentistry in the first place?
It's interesting, and I talk about this quite a bit. I grew up in a family, my dad, and we'll talk a little bit more about him. He was a professor at the university. He taught voice, classical voice. And there were five boys and one daughter in the family. And he basically advised us that we would be professionals in our profession. And so, I've got a brother from Harvard Business School. I've got two brothers that are attorneys. I went into dentistry. I've got one younger brother that never did make it through school, but he's also probably financially the most successful of us all. But anyway, that's why I went into dentistry. I was originally going to actually go into medicine, and I served a mission for my church. And during that period of time, I met so many people who were physicians and so many people who were dentists, and the physicians didn't quite have the family life that the dentists had. And so when I got back to school, I switched my major to pre-dental, and the rest was history.
Okay. Yeah. And then did you raise a family through that time?
Beg your pardon?
Did you raise a family through that time?
Yes. I have 4 children and raised my children while I was, once I was in dental school. I got through school before I ever got married. So once I got in and established my practice, ended up with 4 children.
All right. And then when it was time for them to choose their professions, did you tell them the same thing, or was it all different?
Absolutely not. I basically told them, you know what, you guys do whatever is going to make you happy, and at the same time, provide what you're looking for in life.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I've told my children too. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
even, when we were growing up too, things were a little bit different as far as everybody thought there was that just kind of one path to success. And now we're finding there's many, many paths to success.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting. I've taught a number of different types of development classes, and one talks about an identity profile and talks about the different types of personalities that we experience, which are basically, at least in this model, innate, an imprinted personality and a conscious personality. And what's interesting about that is so many people, including myself at that point in time, are living in that imprinted personality. We're doing what we should do, what we ought to do, what we've been taught to do, what our teachers, parents, everybody tells us, rather than being true to ourselves and living in that innate and conscious personality. So it's been interesting to look at that. Did I love dentistry? Absolutely. And I really enjoyed that. Did I love, and do I love working in the business arena? I've enjoyed that too, but probably right now, this is what I'm enjoying most.
Mm-hmm. And talk more about what you're doing now.
Back in September of last year, I decided to, quote, semi-retire. And I've had the radio show for a number of years, but I've been really focusing at that time on business tips and trends. And I realized that there has come a point in time where we're experiencing some real problems in the world, and people are finding discouragement really is affecting their lives. And I thought, you know what, it's time to do something to inspire people. So I came up with this concept of Inspire Vision. And the whole goal was then to start interviewing people who somehow are making a difference in people's lives, such as yourself with your podcast. And am I trying to reach millions of people? Absolutely not. But I'm getting enough feedback occasionally, which doesn't happen often, that there's people that I've interviewed, it's made a difference in someone's life. And that's kind of where I'm at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's beautiful. And, I wanted to kind of go back to the thing you talked about earlier about it was the being that innate person, or you're basically who you were born to be.
Yes.
How do you find that purpose? Some people, they've been doing like dentistry their whole life, and they realize after 20 years, this really wasn't me.
Well, and what's interesting, I mean, as I said, I really have focused on working with businesses, but one of the concepts that I came up with fairly quickly was, as I was working with business owners, I recognized that whatever things I was helping them to understand and to teach them actually applied in life too. And so if they were able to take that and also apply that into life, all of a sudden it was really making a big difference for them. For me, my purpose, I think I really discovered my purpose back in 2010. I kind of had a hint about it, but I think that there are times that something comes up in our lives and all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is what my purpose really is. Other people are fortunate enough to do some meditation and all of a sudden discover that. But for me, I'm more left brain than I am right brained. And bottom line is, it took me a while to actually figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So what did you figure out in 2010?
My dad passed away in 2010. And after he passed away, we got a call from a couple of his past students who are now also at Northwestern University where he taught. And they asked if they could do a memorial concert for him. And of course, we were very pleased to have that happen. So went back there, and they had this amazing concert, memorial concert, invited a number of his students who could come back, and also invited a number of his students who were now professional and very well known nationally and internationally as classical voice teachers, opera singers. And it was really interesting. There was one story that one of the fellows told that I think probably touched me the most. He was talking about how he and my dad became very good friends, even though there was a huge age gap, because he's one of my dad's students. And he talked about the fact that over the years, they started playing tennis together as one of the things they enjoyed doing. And he says, ultimately, and ultimately he was playing tennis long beyond when he should be playing tennis. I suppose now he'd be playing pickleball, right? But he was still playing tennis. And so anyway, he says, and he says, when we played competitively, but we always played to make sure that we were honest and who hit the line, who didn't hit the line. Mm-hmm. And he says, occasionally he would beat me. Mm-hmm. And he says, and I was trying to figure out how that happened. And I finally realized that, you know what? Norman willed me off the court. And then he tells a story about he was over in Germany. He had been asked to audition for one of the operas there. And he was over there, and I'm not good at opera, and I don't even understand all the music. But anyway, there was one standard thing that he had to sing. And so he tells about the fact that he went up against the top German opera singer. And when it was all said and done, not only did they choose him for that opera, but they chose him for the entire season.
Oh, wow.
And as he walked off the stage, and this is what he shared with us, as he walked off the stage, he said, I finally realized what had happened. I had willed him off the stage. And then he went on to say, and I'm going to get a little emotional here, but he went on to say, Norman gave us the will to win, to succeed, mm-hmm. to live, and to love. And that was interesting because that became the message of everyone that spoke at that memorial service, all of his students. Mm-hmm. And it was almost a side thing, like, yeah, he was a great voice teacher, and he was nationally known as a classical voice teacher. But their whole point is he taught them, he gave them the will to live, to love, to succeed, and to win. And I walked out of there and I thought, holy cow. Here, my dad not only was living his purpose because he loved music, maybe to a degree that shouldn't have been, but he loved music, he loved working with his students, but more importantly, somewhere along the line, his character was such that he taught them some very important values.
That is beautiful. I'm getting chills the whole time you're talking. I just feel chills up and down. It's just an amazing story. What a wonderful person to have as your, person to look up to.
Well, and yeah, and it was really interesting because as I realized that, I thought, you know what, how am I living my life and how am I literally affecting people's lives? And I've seen some people in business that are, yeah, they're making good money at their business, but they're also doing it because they have that deeper purpose of touching people's lives. And as I started to work with people in their businesses, one of the first things I do with them is let's figure out what your purpose really is in your business. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I wouldn't stop until it got to the point where it was in some way about other people. And that's when they really got on track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So right now, some people's businesses are just thriving and skyrocketing with all these changes, and some people's businesses are diving, and some people personally, emotionally are doing okay, but some people are definitely not doing okay. What is, as you look around and see these things happening, what is the best advice for people to actually thrive?
Well, it's interesting. I'm interviewing some people tomorrow, maybe if they can get everything put together. And they've developed a school for young women that are experiencing all sorts of stressful things in their lives, OCD and that type of thing. And I'm looking at that and realizing, you know what, they're developing a business that they're going to make some good money at. But more importantly, they've recognized that there's a need out there for people, and particularly these young women, and how can they meet that need and develop concepts and businesses practices in order to help them. And what I see is a lot of people are out there now really doing things to help others. And I think that becomes one of the key aspects is what can we do to touch people's lives? And, I was guilty, and I have been guilty of, always thinking, all right, how do I reach the most amount of people and touch the most amount of lives? And I was reminded of the story of one time, starfish story. Are you familiar with that one? Where there's a little boy out on the beach, and he's, picking up all the starfish that have come in and throwing them back in. And an older gentleman walks by and looks at him, and just shaking his head and go, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm throwing the starfish back in." He says, "Look at the thousands of starfish around here. There's no way you're going to make a difference." And then the little boy picks up one starfish, throws it out, and looks at the man and says, "I just made a difference for him."
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is, we all have this idea that we need to touch and, hundreds of people, thousands of people, whatever. The reality is that it's like the butterfly effect. We can touch one person in a positive way, and ultimately that spreads out to reach hundreds, if not thousands of people.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. And actually, the way my podcast is set up is to try and have as many different kinds of people with different kinds of stories on. So I'm hoping that this one person resonates with this one person, and then this other person resonates with this one person. So if each guest only just resonates with one person, it's worth it.
Well, and that's the point. I'm just like you. I have people from all different sorts of, walks of life that from spiritual to non-spiritual to this to that. And what's interesting is, okay, so this may not be something that I necessarily believe in, but the reality is to listen to them, share that, because I know somewhere out there, there's someone that's going to resonate with them. And if that can happen, that's what it's all about.
Exactly. So you have something called the be, do, have paradigm. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting as I've looked at myself and, as we talked about this personality profile and at what point in time do we actually get back to who we really are? Reminds me of a statement out of the Bible that I think has fascinated me, and I've tried to understand it over the years, and I'm starting to kind of get a glimpse of what I think it may mean. When Christ makes the statement, "I am that I am," and when I was going to business school, one of the concepts that came up was this be, do, have. And as I've read a little bit, Abraham Lincoln makes an interesting comment. Let me read it for you. "You can have anything you want if you want it badly enough. You can be anything you want to be, do anything you set out to accomplish if you hold to that desire with singleness of purpose." And I think that becomes the basis of this concept of be, do, have. I know that I would laugh when I was going to business school because as they talked about that, they talked about the fact that particularly dentists, which I could identify with, and many other business professionals, actually reverse that. They do, or they have, so that they can be, and now they have to do. So they want to have all of that nice house, those nice cars, all of those type of things so that it will show people that they are successful. And now all of a sudden, guess what? You've got to work your tail off to pay for all of that.
Right.
And I think in general, we all to some degree have that happen. And I think this concept of becoming becomes really the key as we look about what's going on in the world. And there are, I talked to my son about this yesterday. There are all sorts of different philosophies of what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, so on and so forth. We're seeing all of this violence occur. Good people who are wanting to make a difference and are basically saying, you know what, we need to consider greater diversity. We need to do all of these things. And then other people that are coming in and creating all sorts of havoc. What's the difference and what's making a difference? And I think it ends up being that it's who they are. Our reflection of our actions is really a reflection of who we are. And so the key in my mind is how do we become the highest level of what we want to be? It's interesting. I was just researching a little bit more on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
And he has them talking about the fact that the highest one was let me read this here because I got it here, the need for development, creativity, growth, self-actualization. And so, everyone really jumped on that over the years. And the whole point was to reach that personal self-actualization.
Yeah.
And I was just reading some other comments that had looked at what had occurred in his life just before he died. And he actually was criticizing his old work and basically saying, he was basically saying, you know what? That's not really the top level, because what that's really talking about is just personal interest. If you're self-actualized, you've reached this level of professional, you've reached this level of whatever it happens to be. And he says there's one more, and that's called transcendency. And I think that's what really makes the difference. And here's what he says about that. He says self-transcendence. In fact, what I understand is that he wrote this down. He passed away and it wasn't published till after his death. And that's why not many people really understand it. But he says this transcendence is self-transcendence. This may involve service to others, devotion to an ideal or a cause, and a desire to be united with what is perceived as transcendent or divine. And he goes on to say that it's feelings, limitless horizons, opening up to the vision, the feeling of being simultaneously powerful and almost more helpless than anyone ever was before. And he talks about how it's becoming truly one. He says, and he uses couples as a difference. You can be in love. That may be self-actualization. But when you become one, that's self-transcendency. And I think that's, I think that we're focused as a people so much on this self-actualization, what's in it for me? And we're seeing that all over the place, rather than what can I do? Can I reach a point where my behavior is a reflection of who I am, which is really reflecting love, gratitude, giving, and helping others?
Yeah.
I mean, think about this argument about, do I wear a mask or do I not wear a mask? Okay. And I happen to wear a mask when I'm out in public. I spent about 3 months in Vietnam last year. And what was interesting, and it was really tough for me to get used to, probably 60 to 80% of the people constantly wore masks. They'd come in to socialize with us, and all of a sudden they'd put on their mask, and I'm thinking, what on earth? Do I have bad breath, or what's the deal? And the realization is that that's just how they are, and that's what they do. Well, here it's really interesting. You've got all of these people that are arguing about, no one has the right to tell me to wear a mask, and on and on and on and on and on. And the reality is that if we really were at that self-transcendency level, if we were really at that I am level, we would be looking at that and going, you know what? If this is going to make a difference and protect one person's life, I'm going to wear a mask. And it changes the entire dimension.
Yeah, it really, really does. And that was interesting what you said about Vietnam. I had no idea that people were doing that before COVID.
Oh yeah, and they did really well. And I have some friends over there that I stay in touch with, and one of them taught English at one of their English schools, and they shut everything down for 4 months. Literally, they shut everything down for 1 month, but they had minimal problems with it. And apparently they just had someone from China go into one of the cities, and they had another outbreak a while ago, so they've shut some things down again. But they've literally been able to control that to a large degree. And part of it is because the people over there were willing to do what it needed to be done, and they were already doing it anyway.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And when you were talking earlier about, you can come out and be helpful, or you can come out and be basically destroying things. But the common message I'm hearing from other people all the time is, let's just be one. Yeah, there's differences in people, in color or religion or whatever, but as long as we're, first take care of ourselves and then become one with other people, where we're helping people and have the common good in mind, then I think things would be a whole lot better than people dividing over religion or politics or whatever it is they're dividing over.
Well, and it's interesting, Maslow came up with this hierarchy of needs. There's actually three individuals that came up with an emotional tone scale. And it's really fascinating as you look about how they came up with it. I'm not going to go into that because some of it's a little strange, but there are actually three individuals that came up with an emotional tone scale. And in that, and probably the one I like the most is David Hawkins. He wrote the book Power versus Force. Mm-hmm. But he talks about at the very lowest, you've got shame, then you move up to guilt, apathy, grief, fear, anger, and then all the way up to enlightenment. And what's interesting is you look at that, and as we look at what's going on in the world and we look at people's behavior, you see people who are at that higher level of an emotional tone, emotional intelligence, you can put it that way, that are literally doing things for others. They're giving, they're considerate, they're doing, what can I do to help others? Meanwhile, we have those people down in the anger mode that literally you see their behavior, which is literally creating havoc here in the United States. And unfortunately, what happens is that when they do that, they bring people with them. What I found interesting about getting into this whole emotional concept is that, and you may have experienced this and viewed this in workplaces, when you go into a workplace and look at the culture, what I have found is the culture ends up at the level of the lowest emotional tone. So if there's a person in there that is really low, they're angry, whatever they happen to be, you see everybody else come down there. As a matter of fact, when I worked with businesses, I would go in and we'd use statistics and key indicators to make sure that we were seeing what we were doing. But when I first walked in, I would, particularly a dentist, I'd say, look, you've got 5 or 6 employees here, okay? I said, I guarantee you, percentage-wise, when I'm looking at your statistics, that you've got someone in here that is below a certain level, and they're pulling everybody down. And we will watch them leave as we start to put in all of these things. And so as we started to put in the discipline, as we started to put in the responsibility for each individual to keep track of what they're really doing, all of a sudden, that one person would get up, would get angry, I'm leaving, I'm going to quit, I don't like this. And guess what happened to their statistics as soon as they left?
Sky high, right? They went way up.
Sky high. And it was consistent. And so as we see what's going on in the world today, the question I think for each one of us individually is, how do I make this a better life? And how do I avoid being sucked in by these people who are drawing me down? I see people who in most cases are kind, are loving. There's one particular person that I know about that's just a wonderful, wonderful young man. Just got married, just incredible. And yet occasionally I see him lash out at situations that just does not ring true to who I know he is. And I recognize that what's happened is that somebody has pulled him in to that anger, into that antagonism, and literally has brought him down. And so then what do you do? And like I told my business owners, there's only one way to get this handled. We get them out, and you're not going to fire them. We're going to just create a situation where they are going to walk away because, quite frankly, they don't want to take on the responsibility of what they need to do. They want to blame others.
Exactly. Now, do you think that works at home too? So a lot of people are now home with family members, sometimes many family members, and they were fine when everyone was going to work and going to school, but now there's rumbling, there's maybe fighting or arguments, or people, some people getting more violent or more drunk or whatever, there's things.
Well, and we're smiling about that, but the reality is, I was interviewing a fellow out of Florida, has a good friend that's a divorce attorney up in New York, and about 3 or 4 months ago, and he said that his friend told him that he's busier than he's ever been because of the COVID and everybody's home. I mean, I'm reminded of the stories that I hear about people whose husbands, for instance, retire and all of a sudden they're home and the wives just say, will you get out of here, please? Can't stand you being home. You've been at work all of this time. So I think that, out of every tough situation that occurs, we can either look at that with pessimism and anger. We can look at that with gratitude. And as we see what's going on, a lot of people are having a lot of problems, as you mentioned. But the reality is wouldn't it be wonderful for them to finally be able to realize that my behavior is a reflection of who I am? Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden I'm in a situation with my family, with my kids. And the reality is there's anger, there's frustration, there's all of these things going on, which means that's who I really am. Mm-hmm. And how do I become someone better? How do I reach that higher level of transcendency and goodness that I know that I can become? Because I personally believe that we all have the ability. Innately, we are all, with a few exceptions, innately, we are all very, very good people. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that. And so what happens is we tend to be pulled down sometimes by our environment, by limiting beliefs that have been developed within our subconscious because of what's gone on as children and so forth. Mm-hmm. So there's all of those things that are there, but the reality is we have the ability to look at ourselves and to begin on a path that will bring us up to a point where we're not being affected by that anymore. We may have to choose to say, you know what, I'm not hanging around these friends anymore. Because quite frankly, I finally realized they're bringing me down. Mm-hmm. And find friends that are more uplifting and are really looking to do something a little bit different in life.
Mm-hmm. Any ideas on how to work with that at home? So let's say you're not going to leave, you're not going to divorce, you have maybe you have one child that's always like bad attitude. What things could we do to help them maybe come up the tone scale and meet up with the rest of the family?
Well, that's funny. I'm smiling. I'm actually interviewing within the next couple of weeks 2 marriage counselors for the show for this very reason. So they'll probably have a much better concept than I have. One of the interesting things, I had 2 boys that really in high school didn't get along. And it was really frustrating. And it was at that point in time that I came across this concept of the identity profile. And I developed a friendship over there with a fellow who had developed this. And I actually trained with him and got it put together. And then I asked him to work with my 2 boys. And it's made all the difference in the world. Now they're best friends. But what it was to understand that this whole concept of who are you innately, who are you from an imprinted standpoint, are you behaving imprinted, or are you really consciously expressing what your innate personality is? Mm-hmm. And as they went through that course, and I actually taught this course for a number of years, as they go through that course, the key was that it isn't about me at all. It's about them. One of my boys came back from a Boy Scout camp one week, and he was just devastated. He was one of the assistant scout leaders, as a young boy, and his scoutmaster just had ripped into him and just criticized and ripped into him about something, I don't know. And my son was just feeling so low. And I sat down with him and I said, all right, you remember what you were taught? Think about this. Is it all about you, or is it all about him? You have got someone here who's a scoutmaster who literally is living down in that antagonism and anger mode. That's where they are in their emotional tone. Mm-hmm. And so his anger at you has nothing to do with you. It has to do with he has no other way to express himself. Mm-hmm. And I think that as people are back in home together and so forth, and realizing that, if someone says something to me that I'm going to take unkind, number one, it's not about me. It's about them and what they're going through and where they're at from an emotional level. Mm-hmm. And if I understand that, then the ability to accept that communication, understand that that's where their reality is at that point in time, but it doesn't have to be my reality. Mm-hmm. and I can actually be grateful for whatever I can be grateful for and express that gratitude and that love to them. And I guarantee you that with expression of gratitude and love, what you will see ultimately is people start to move up because of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So just to change direction a little bit, what's the best path to personal prosperity?
You know, and when we talk about personal prosperity, I use a different definition here. When we think about prosperity, everybody thinks about wealth. And I look at it, yeah, that's one of the definitions, but the definition I like is a state of health, happiness, and prospering in life. And I think that becomes the whole thing. And I think that in order to accomplish that, there's basically 7 areas that I think we need to look at. Number one is, what is our personal purpose? I think that becomes key, is we have got to discover a purpose. And there are ways to do that. I'm sure you've helped your clients do that in many ways. And then once you discover your purpose, what are your values? What is it that's really important to you? It's really fascinating. I took a test one time from a friend I was working with, and it was really interesting because it was really a values evaluation, and you went through and, okay, what's most important, what's most important, what's most important, and then you started to narrow it down. And at the end, sometimes it was really enlightening to see what the personal values really were. So I think going through some type of thing like that really makes a difference, to really find out what are your values. And then what's your personal constitution? You know, we talk about the Constitution of the United States, which has basically allowed this country to be what it is for so many years. And how many of us actually have developed a personal constitution by which we live by, that actually establishes our values and what we will do and what we will not do. At what point in time do we say, you know, I'm sorry, that is not my personal constitution, which then ends up becoming integrity. So you got your personal constitution, which then becomes your integrity if you follow that. And then ultimately, what are your leadership qualities? And this has nothing to do with business. How do you treat people? How do you help people? How do you guide people? Because everybody, I believe, in this world has someone that they are able to help and guide. And so how do we develop those leadership qualities of communication, of understanding, of non-judgment, of diversity, all of those types of things? And then ultimately, what's your clear path? And I think that gets to this point of Maslow's hierarchy. If you add the self-transcendency, getting into all of these, this one, emotional vibration analysis, whatever they happen to be, how do we go from this level up to this level where we're really at a point where we are experiencing life? We have become one with others. We have become one with God. We are just truly doing what we need to do to elevate the lives of others. And I think that becomes it. So basically, you've got personal values, your purpose, your values, your constitution, your integrity, your leadership qualities, and then what's your clear path.
Beautiful. So just getting personal here, what to you gives you the most joy and fulfillment in your life?
You know, number one, my family, my kids. We kind of joke a little bit about how many times I've moved once I sold my practice back in Palm Springs. But I can tell you that every move that I made had something to do with what I thought was going to be best for the kids. And they truly are my greatest joy. As I watch them grow, as I watch them make their mistakes, but as I watch them accomplish what they need to do and be kind and really do things for others, I think that's my greatest joy. And I would say secondarily is every once in a while, and I know you go through this too, it's not often that we ever get feedback about something that we're trying to accomplish for good, where someone actually comes back and says, you know what, thank you. You really touched my life. That doesn't happen very often. And when it does, it's like, wow. And I think that's my second greatest joy. And like I say, it doesn't happen very often. Occasionally, I've actually had someone contact me and say, thank you. that has made a big difference for me.
Yeah, and it does make a big difference for sure.
Yeah. Now, beyond that, I love photography. I'm trying to get back into fly fishing. So I think anything outdoors, I think that's one of the keys that is really important for people to understand. They've got to get outside of themselves. In fact, I've been reading an interesting book talking about creativity and talking about the fact that only when we really allow ourselves to become creative in some way are we able to truly enjoy and experience life the way we should be.
Yeah, that is so true. I know before we came on, we were talking about that we both have shows, and I did so many shows last month, like 27, and I did 22 this month, and I for next month I said, well, in September I'm shutting down my schedule. Why? Because I usually do art at least a few times a week. And last month, and even into this month, I haven't touched my art. I'm like, something wrong here. You can't, you got to practice what you preach. And so what did I do? I changed my schedule so that I can have my art time again. So important.
Oh, it is. And it's interesting in this book. And the author is talking about, she is strictly, an artist type of thing. And she's teaching people to draw. And she says, you know what, and I've made this statement, I can't draw the broadside of a barn, but she talks about how she's able to literally teach everyone how to draw. And when they start to draw and develop that creativity, all of a sudden, what happens is things else in their life begin to increase, and they start to see that creativity. It's really tough when you look at right brain, left brain individuals. Your left brain people are your real analytical people. I happen to be left brain, so I know that. But the right brain people are the ones that are creative, and people think, well, I'm either right brain or I'm left brain. But the reality is that you can be both. And if you find yourself more in the left brain, analytical, this, being creative, doing something of creativity, whatever it is, allows you to also become more balanced in your emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that is so true, because I've been kind of artistic since a very young child, but I went into medicine, which is a very left brain type of thing, and I think it's been helpful. I think it's really helpful to balance those two sides of the brain.
Well, it really is. And in fact, I love photography. I have for years. And finally, last summer, my boy sat down with me and said, Dad, you're almost good enough that we could actually start selling your photos for you.
Wow.
I'm going, okay. So I went back in and I started doing some more training and so forth. And we finally just opened up a website on Shopify, and my son's going to do all the marketing and all that type of stuff. But the reality is I'm finding it fascinating that I take the creativity that I enjoy in getting photographs, but I'm also taking all of that analytical of how do you compose? How do you use the light correctly? What do you do here? And then when you're finished, how do you edit it to really make it look the way you want it to look? And so I think, and you know what? I'm loving it. I'm finding that that's really creating a lot of satisfaction and joy, particularly now where we're kind of self-isolating all of the time. So I think if people will just kind of find out what are the things you like to do, what's a hobby that you enjoy, and get out and not only do it, but really become the best that you possibly can be at that. And when you do that, all of a sudden, I think you find a greater sense of joy and happiness and peace in your life.
Exactly. When you're totally immersed in it. You're totally immersed. Nothing else even matters. You're just there. And it's a wonderful place to be.
That's exactly right.
So I'm just curious, what do you like to take pictures of?
Mainly landscape. I love landscape. I also like to take some of animals. I've spent some time down in Cabo, and when I've been down there, I've been able to get over, and they have a bird sanctuary over there, and I've gotten some really amazing pictures of some birds and some other little animals and so forth. But I think I found really mainly I love the landscape because it allows me to travel. And as I travel, I'm able to get pictures and then reflect back later on the joy and the peace that I felt as I'm out there in nature.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you. So if people wanted to hear your radio talk show, where do they go? How do they find it?
They can go on Facebook and like Dr. Doug and Friends Radio, and then they can listen to all of those there. And that's both video and audio. They can go to iHeart Podcasts. They can go to Spotify. They can go to Apple Podcasts. Any major app that has the podcast, just Dr. Doug and Friends Radio, and they'll be able to tap into those.
Okay, yes, that's pretty easy to remember, Dr. Doug and Friends.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and all your wisdom.
Well, and I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for inviting me, Kimberly. This has been wonderful. And I love the fact of what you're doing also. I mean, we're kind of unified in that whole concept of how are we able to reach out and touch other people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. So one last question before we get off the podcast.
Okay.
What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
Be grateful, love, and be happy. And the whole concept of that is be. Mm-hmm. Be the ultimate that you were meant to be, that you can be. And I think that brings about happiness.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Doug, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Really appreciate it. Take care.